Thank you for the introduction, and welcome to my talk on our paper titled Content Type Multipart Oracle, Tapping into Format Oracles in Email End-to-End Encryption. As Sebastian said, I'm Fabian Ising, and this paper is joint work with Damian, Poddebniak, Tobias, Kappert, Christoph, Saatjohann, and Sebastian, Schinzel, obviously. As you might have guessed, this talk is about email. So let's first talk about how an email looks from a technical point of view. Since the 1990s, email has been formatted according to the multi-purpose internet mail extensions, or in short, MIME, which you might know from the web. So every message consists of a header section and a body section, which are separated by an empty line. Our focus will be the content type header that defines the type of data in the body. And it's separated into a media type, in this case text, and a subtype, in this case plain. So this is a plain text message. Of course, MIME can do much more than simple text messages. Today, we'll mainly talk about composite or multipart messages. Here we see multipart alternative email. As the word multipart implies, this message consists of, well, multiple parts. And the subtype alternative implies that all parts are, as far as possible, equivalent representations of the same content. The idea here is that an email client can decide which representation to display depending on supported features or, for example, user preferences. So this email might look like this in an email client displaying HTML, while it might look like this in an email client displaying plain text instead. So now this paper is titled Multipart Oracle, and we have talked about the multiparts, so let's talk about oracles. So let's assume we have some system that decrypts the ciphertext using their private keys, and assume that any user or an attacker can send arbitrary encrypted messages to the system to, well, perform this decryption. Then this system has to leak some kind of information about the decryption result, often via an unintended side channel. This is what we call an oracle. And we differentiate between two types of oracle: Boolean oracles, which simply leak if a decryption and subsequent tests were successful or unsuccessful, and leaky oracles, which leak more detailed information on the decrypted plaintext. In extreme cases, even the full plaintext, as showcased in the 2018 eFail attacks. For the rest of the talk, we will only look at Boolean oracles, however. So for this research, we came up with two relevant attacker models against end-to-end encrypted email. First, an attacker without any special privileges that can send ciphertext via SMTP to a victim. So this is basically the whole internet. The catch here is that the SMTP server has the private key in this case. So this is mainly email security gateways. And the back channel is also provided by this server. So this is pretty similar to the usual Oracle attacker model. You have an online protocol where you can query the server arbitrarily with encrypted messages. However, normally end-to-end encrypted email is more of a store and forward protocol. So the client has to be the Oracle in the second attacker model, obviously. So we need a more powerful attacker, so a passive meddler in the middle that can sniff traffic on the connection between the email client and its IMAP server. These connections can be TLS encrypted, but the attacker does not need to have the ability to break the TLS connection. So they simply observe how many packets of what size are sent in which direction. So we will focus on the second one, and we have a working example for the first one against Google Workspaces in the paper appendix, but due to time constraints, I cannot talk about that today. Note that both attackers have access to the original encrypted message, and their goal is always to decrypt the message or parts of it, which is pretty much the usual Oracle attacker model, or the end-to-end encryption attacker model. So to understand how this attack works, we have to look at the IMAP protocol, and especially the IMAP fetching, so the fetch command which with you are downloading messages in the first place. So this command has two parameters: the message ID, so which message do you want to download, and the data items, in this case, the so-called body structure. And as you might guess from the name, this defines the structure or describes the structure of the body of the message. So assuming the same multipart alternative message I've shown you before, we get this body structure from the server, which you have to read from the bottom up. It looks more complicated than it is. So this is a multipart alternative message. It contains one text HTML part and one text plain part. The client then can decide to request only a specific part of this message. In this case, they might, for example, only want to download the plain text part. So they can send a specific fetch command for that, and the server will only return the plain text. So at this point, we realized, well, IMAP and MIME interact on a pretty deep level with each other. And we soon realized that this could be used as a side channel. So instead of using plain text and HTML parts in multipart alternative emails, we used these alternative parts as containers for our Oracle queries. The attack idea here was as follows. The client, again, fetches the body structure. Then they decide, well, I can display both of them because I can do application encrypted as a content type. So I'll just fetch one of them, in this case, the second one. And now what happens at this point is pretty much what we use as our Oracle. So if the client can decrypt this message and any checks on it are successful, the client has no reason to deal with the other part of the message because these should be equivalent representation of the same message. So no reason to download the second part. So they might, for example, log out or continue with the next email. If, on the other hand, some test fails, the decryption fails for some reason, well, then they might decide to fetch the other body part instead. And so we can discern that on the network level and use that as our Oracle. So armed with this idea, we started looking at SMIME at OpenPGP, so the true prime standards for email end-to-end encryption, in search for exploitable oracles. And for successful exploits, we identified two criteria for these. First, the ciphertext has to be malleable in the first place. And, well, there has to be a potential for oracles. So SMIME version 3.2 ciphertexts are malleable via the XOR operation, and there's no integrity protection at all. So that's pretty great for oracle attacks. OpenPGP, on the other hand, deploys the modification detection code, and by now it's checked in almost all implementations correctly, so there's not much room for ciphertext malleability here. SMIME also provides some probably exploitable oracles in the first place, so they use PKCS7 padding on the CBC encoded plaintext, and they use PKCS1 version 1.5 for RSA encrypted session keys. OpenPGP, on the other hand, doesn't use any plaintext padding for the actual message, and all implementations we tested only provided very weak Bleichenbacher oracles on PKCS1 version 1.5. So we decided to focus on SMIME instead and looked at 19 SMIME-capable email clients in search for exploitable oracles. And we identified 4 factors necessary for such a practical exploit. First, the client needs to support multiple encrypted parts in the first place. Second, it needs to employ automatic fetching of the email or parts of it in the background. Third, it needs to do the fetching lazily, by which I mean that it will fetch body parts only when they are required and not the whole email at once or a lot of parts in bulk, so basically the behavior I've shown you a few slides prior. And fourth, it needs to decrypt messages automatically in the background, for this to be at least a semi-automatic exploit. So the first 10 clients were unexploitable simply because they only allow a single encrypted body part per message. This is not so surprising following like 5 years of email papers which abused complex MIME structures to break email encryption. The next 7 clients were eliminated because they will not automatically fetch messages in the background, but will only fetch them when the user opens the message. So while we could theoretically work around this, it would require the user to open a lot of emails to download and decrypt them, and making the attacks, well, pretty much infeasible. So at this point, only 2 clients remained. Mailmate is eliminated because it does not do lazy fetching, so only Apple's mail client on iOS ticks all the boxes. Still, we had one problem remaining. We had no working oracle in iOS Mail, since none of the classical padding oracles were exploitable. However, by chance, this was really by chance, I found another oracle during testing, the empty line oracle. iOS Mail expects every email to have a new line between the headers and the body, and this even applies to encrypted messages. And we soon realized, well, we can use this as an oracle to decrypt whole messages. So if you send this message to iOS Mail, it will be, yeah, all right, this is a correctly formatted message, and display it, and show basically the same behavior I've shown you before, while if it does not contain an empty line, it will not display it and show other network behavior. So how do we exploit this? Well, we always need a setup phase for each block of the ciphertext. So we have to first create an empty line at the start of the block. So we have to guess 2 bytes following each other. So we have to create a \n basically. We do that by XORing onto the ciphertext, hitting a lot of negatives until at one point we hit the \n part. So we have now a new line in there and can see that from the oracle. And now we take the last byte we have guessed already and fixate it to \n. We iterate over the second byte now. So again, hit a lot of negatives until at one point we hit a second \n. So now we have an empty line again in the message, and the oracle says to us, yes, this is a correctly formatted message. And we continue that for the rest of the block. So this takes around, with some optimizations, around 900 queries per ciphertext block, or around 7 minutes to decrypt one block of ciphertext. Due to time constraints, I'll skip the demo video here, but I've put it on YouTube for you, so if you're interested, please give it a watch. So while we show 2 practical attacks on email end-to-end encryption in our paper, one interesting question remains. Why are so many clients not vulnerable to Oracle attacks? And we have identified 2 main reasons for this. First, clients don't implement the full range of features defined by the standards. Many clients don't use selective fetching, for example, or don't support multiple encrypted parts at all. And others greatly restrict background behavior and parallel processing. And the second main reason was that implementation specifics prevent attacks. For example, network security services and iOS mail ignore invalid CBC padding, making a CBC padding attack, well, not possible, of course. We think that these are rather futile defenses. Not only are they probably involuntary, they also restrict the usability of encrypted email. For example, allowing only one encrypted part per email does not allow separate encryption of attachments. So you will always have to download that really large message that contains a really large document as a whole. And no automatic fetching means that you will get no message notifications. And no automatic decryption means that even if you get notifications, there won't be any content in them. And in multiple device setups, this also restricts searching greatly. And the third one is that users with flaky data connections are, of course, at a disadvantage if they cannot download messages partly in the first place. So I think this is a dangerous conflict. So all of this restricts usability, and at the price of security, it's pretty hard for developers to know if they should implement these features in the future. So let's get to real countermeasures. Sadly, client developers cannot do a lot right now. We can only recommend some band-aid fixes. The first idea would be to prevent oracles in the first place, but as we have seen by a bazillion TLS attacks by now, this is pretty hard to do in practice. And for email, this would even mean doing everything in constant time, including rendering of emails. So I think this is pretty much infeasible. So the only thing client developers can do right now is, well, do what I've just told you not to do, restrict features for end-to-end encrypted emails. So this is rather disappointing. So what we really need are standard fixes. So authenticated encryption helps with the malleability of symmetric ciphers, and thankfully SMIME 4.0 adds the ability to use the auth-enveloped data type, and OpenBGP will hopefully decide on an authenticated cipher soon. And the second would be dropping RSA, or at least PKCS1 version 1.5 finally, to prevent attacks on RSA malleability. So in conclusion, many clients are safe against our attacks, which is good. However, the defenses seem, well, involuntary. So some attacks still remain possible, and explicit countermeasures are necessary to prevent these attacks in the future. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.